Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Crees Lecture for 2016. It's very nice to see you here this evening in the Parry Rooms at the Royal College of Music. And it's my very great pleasure this evening to introduce tonight's speaker, Roger Wright, who is going to talk to us on the topic of the power of music in a changing world. How relevant is that? Roger is a great friend of the college. He's also had a very distinguished career. He's currently Chief Executive of Aldeburgh Music. His past positions include Artistic Administrator at the Cleveland Orchestra, where he worked very closely with the late Pierre Boulez, at Deutsche Grammophon, where he was Executive Director and Vice President, and then, of course, his very distinguished career at the BBC. Head of Classical Music initially, and then Controller of Radio 3 from 1998, I believe, and then a hugely successful controller of the Proms with all sorts of innovations which we've been able to witness at close quarters. And it was Roger, really, that was responsible for our current very close relationship with the Proms at the Royal College of Music, for which we're very grateful. One last thing that I must not forget to add, Roger is a fellow of the Royal College of Music, and he received that award from the Prince of Wales in 2007. So, Roger, thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin, and thank you to the college for inviting me to speak to you today. Given the title of this Crees Lecture, The Power of Music in a Changing World, the words of Martin Luther may seem particularly appropriate ones with which to begin. Music is God's gift to man, the only art of heaven given to earth, the only art of earth we take to heaven. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the title of the lecture that I've chosen, I shall be speaking about A, the power of music, and B, the changing world. I have to admit that the name Crees was new to me. I feel honoured to speak in this particular slot as I look back at the range of previous distinguished speakers. For those who don't know, Montague Hodsall Crees was a barrister whose deep love of music led him to establish an annual lectureship here at the Royal College of Music, and that the subject shall have, and I quote, some bearing on the meaning and appreciation of music. Well, I'll do what I can. And the bequest requirement goes on, and where possible, there will be both vocal and instrumental illustration. The good news for you is that I shall be neither singing nor playing. As our classical world continues to change and public funding comes under increasing pressure, let me take a moment too to celebrate those who, like Crees, had such a love of music and so understood its power and importance that they were happy to give money to help sustain our world. A broad definition of philanthropy includes the love of humanity, in the sense of caring, nourishing, developing, and enhancing what it means to be human. In other words, private initiatives for public good, focusing on the quality of life. As the public purse is increasingly stretched, we'll be turning more urgently, I'm sure, to those individuals who help us fund our institutions and creative endeavours. And we should never take them for granted. And we do need to find new ways to encourage others to join them and to celebrate their vital and often selfless support. As we're here in the Parry Room, if I were to have used any music examples, I would have played the slow movement of Parry's Fifth Symphony of 1912. When in 1883 George Grove founded the Royal College of Music, in Simon Heffer's words, an enterprise of incalculable cultural importance, Grove made Charles Hubert Hastings Parry Professor of Composition. And when Grove retired in 1895, Parry became director of this college. His commitment to developing the careers of others inevitably got in the way of his own life as a composer. His pupils included Vaughan Williams, his greatest champion, Holst, Ireland, and Herbert Howells, whose life he saved in 1916 by paying for the impoverished 24-year-old to be the first man in Britain to have radium treatment for cancer. Howells lived to be 90. Parry, as a man and as a composer, is about so much more than those glorious hymns, Jerusalem and Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. So I continue to fly the flag for Parry and his achievement. He was essentially a deeply modest man with none of the push that some lesser composers would use in the 20th century to advertise themselves and their works. And in our changing world, we need more than ever to challenge laziness and lazy second-hand thinking. So let me just give you, by way of example, a Parry story from this very room. When in the Proms in 2010, across the road, we put on the first performance of Parry's Fifth Symphony. A number of distinguished musical writers in this room challenged me by talking about the second-rate nature of Parry's symphonies. I simply asked them to talk a little bit more about which of the symphonies they were particularly referring to and how they might rank them. And it quickly became clear that they'd not heard any of those symphonies, in fact, hardly probably a note of Parry's music at all. It's fine to take an opinion, but do it on the basis of fact. Experience the music first, not just pick up lazy second-hand opinion. And I'll return to the dangers of lazy casual comment later. So my music example choices would have been Parry and perhaps not surprisingly, given my current role at Aldeburgh Music, Frank Bridge, Benjamin Britten's private teacher, and Britten himself. Britten studied here in the early 30s, and I encourage you to read his diaries and letters, if you haven't already done so, as a wonderful first-hand series of snapshots of that particular period in general, and of music life in London in particular. One diary entry reads, May the 5th, 1931. Begin slow movement of quartet before going to college at 11:45 to find my composition lesson has been moved to Thursdays. Only the college hasn't informed me of this, so that I miss a lesson this week. This establishment, exclamation mark. And establishment has a capital E, by the way. Clearly a 17-year-old who already knew his own mind. Britten had a bit of a bumpy ride here. Perhaps that was inevitable with such a strong creative figure, even in his youth. But go back a year, and this letter to his parents, and there is a glimpse of how important those formative years were to him. Dearest and beloved parents, I'm terribly sorry I didn't write before today, but I was at the college the whole day, except half an hour for lunch. Mr. Benjamin, Arthur Benjamin, composer and Britten's piano teacher, Mr. Benjamin is very nice, but says that if I wish to take piano seriously, I must practice 4 hours a day. Then he adds, however, we will discuss that on Friday. So, goodbye, darlings. This is very nice here. Thank you very much for letting me come. And then the PS, the really serious business. Could you possibly bring my tennis racket and shoes? I'd have loved to have heard Britten and Parry argue about the relative merits of the music of Vaughan Williams. Vaughan Williams was not high on Britten's list of significant composers. However, VW was an early fan of Britten, as shown by this 1931 letter to Britten's mother from Sir Hugh Allen, director of this college when Britten was a student. I was delighted to hear from Vaughan Williams, who examined at the end of the term for composition, how highly he thought of your boy's work. I will do my best to give him as much assistance as is possible, for I have a high opinion of his ability and would desire to do everything to help him. Is there any possibility of making application to the County Council education authorities? It rather depends on the place where he was born. And to the best of my knowledge, and just for the record, Britten didn't receive any funding from Suffolk Council to support his time here. But that phrase, it depends on the place where he was born, now I see has a real resonance, beyond the business of local funding. Aldeburgh and Snape, music and place. It's impossible to hear the music of Peter Grimes without thinking Aldeburgh. It's impossible to hear so much of the later music and its resonance without thinking of the acoustic of Snape Maltings and that setting. And that sense of focus and inspiration is what people say time and time again, either audiences or performers who come to experience the magic of that particular place. And there's something, I think, also extraordinary about the notion of music and place. If we were in Dragon's Den, and Britten was stepping forward with a great idea for an 850-seater concert hall, which doubled as an opera house, and a 350-seater concert hall, and a 120-seater recital room, and an organization which was based around new music, talent development, and the use of music to show communities how to come together. In a catchment area of a couple of thousand people, most of which is the sea, built on a floodplain, and then he asked you all to invest. I suspect you might be quickly looking the other way. But it's because he was from Suffolk, it was because he remained in that place, and because he knew the power of the place and the power of his connection to it. That's where that particular line from the 40s through to the present day, unbroken, but with tradition refreshed and reinvigorated, is so powerful. So to the power of music, and I will use Britain as my first witness. In 1964, he received the first Aspen Award, and his speech on accepting it still stands out today as a model of acceptance speeches, not least because it actually has something to say and remains a powerful personal testament about the matters which were so important to him. His speech has just been reprinted, by the way, in a splendid new book called Britain, the Composer and the Community. The most powerful part of the speech is where he famously asserts the primacy of the holy triangle of composer, performer, and listener. And particularly telling is the opening paragraph, which, if you'll excuse me, needs quoting at length. What's important is not the analyzable part of music, but the something which emerges from it, but transcends it, which cannot be analyzed because it is not in it, but of it. It is the quality which can't be acquired by simply the exercise of a technique or system. It's something to do with personality, with gift, with spirit. I quite simply call it magic, a quality which I value more than any other part of music. So here Britain's moved away from the sociological aspects of music towards the metaphysical, deep thinking indeed. But before he concludes with the declaration that true musical experience demands the holy triangle, he launches a broadside. He roundly criticizes a culture, even though it was relatively embryonic 50 years ago, in which music can be permanently on tap. He says, anyone, anywhere, at any time can listen to the B minor Mass upon one condition only, that they possess a machine. No qualification is required of any sort, faith, virtue, education, experience, age. Music is now for all. Fascinating that, in a way, he should be saying music is now for all in a pejorative way, given his view about the sense of music in the community. And Colin Matthews, in this new book, contributes a fascinating chapter, unpacking Britain's words and also pointing out along the way that Peter Pears probably had quite a hand in helping Britain write the speech. As Colin Matthews notes, the attack on new technology is quite violent, yet it comes from someone who himself regularly recorded everything that he wrote, and so as to avoid being accused of biting the hand that feeds him, he's immediately at pains to express gratitude to the products of the recording process as a means of education or study. The mention of education is, of course, welcome, while a further emphasis on the need for effort on the listener's part, a commitment that matches that of the composer and performer, is his parting message. This, I think, is a great challenge to us all. Do we prepare well enough for the experience of hearing music? I plead guilty. Spira Mirabilis, wonderful group, who come together chiefly with the aim of rehearsing rather than performing, it seems, came for a residency at Snape quite recently and performed two pieces, Britain's Nocturne and a fabulous new piece by Colin Matthews, Spiraling. They spent 40 to 46 hours on each piece, a remarkable amount of loving preparation without conductor. There were conductors present who quite pointedly remarked that, of course, if they'd had a conductor, they probably wouldn't have needed that length of time to rehearse. But they would say that, wouldn't they? What came across in those two performances was extraordinary dedication. And I have to say, as I heard a remarkable performance of Britain's Nocturne, I felt terribly guilty that I actually hadn't prepared better for the performance itself. I thought I knew Britain's Nocturne. I could remember the poets that he'd set, but all sorts of things in the humility of facing this extraordinarily well-prepared performance, I realized that actually I should have come to it better prepared. And I think in the noise of our world, actually that business of how we prepare for performances is something I need to think rather more about. In this changing world, increasing noise and less time, we say. Of course, Britain was a musician who understood, as I said, the power of music to bring communities together and to develop relationships and build self-esteem long before the word outreach had been used or invented. A perfect example, of course, of that outreach is Noah's Flood, a wonderful bringing together of professional and non-professional, of adults and children, all to a common purpose. And the work that Aldeburgh Music now does continues Britain's inspirational vision with world-class performances in world-class venues in a remarkable landscape, but also with an education and community program that Britain would recognize as one which perpetuates his belief in the strength of music to heal and to inspire. He probably wouldn't have actually been able to think of some of those programs themselves. Why? Because the circumstances in which we now live and work are so different. For example, work with those who are affected by dementia. Not just dementia sufferers themselves, but those also caring for them, dementia affected. Workshops in our local prisons, with prisoners making music together. Year-round community singing programs with those who are socially disadvantaged and who suffer from the perils of low achievement, low aspiration, low engagement, and economic deprivation. A real picture of so much of Suffolk and Norfolk that you frankly don't get if you pitch up for the Aldeburgh Festival and simply walk along Aldeburgh High Street and think you're being particularly adventurous if you then go to Southwold High Street. Just go a few miles around and examine the sort of challenges that community faces and the sort of challenges that music can uniquely help to deal with. So music has indeed a unique power to inspire. As Britain's friend and collaborating poet W.H. Auden said, music is the best means we have of digesting time. And as the work of the unique West Eastern Divan Orchestra proves, music brings people together and crosses traditional boundaries. In that orchestra, Israeli and Arab musicians who can barely speak to each other use music, the only true universal language, to bring them closer together. I find it impossible to imagine a world without, for example, Monteverdi, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, Mahler, Debussy, Stravinsky. You'll all have your own list. Britten, Sondheim, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and yes, Bob Marley. It was Marley, by the way, who famously noted that the one good thing about music is that when it hits you, you feel no pain. How lucky, however, we are that all these composers came before us and that we're now able to enjoy their music. What, though, is the value of music? Well, I can't put it better than a way a TV reviewer wrote about a program in which a rap artist tried to interest young urban musicians in classical music. He said this: "Classical music is the most endlessly rewarding and exhilarating phenomenon in the whole of human intellectual endeavor. Classical music is the most endlessly rewarding and exhilarating phenomenon in the whole of human intellectual endeavor." In other words, contrary to the line that we're regularly fed, classical music is not just about relaxing. I rather tire of those relax and chill out messages and get exasperated by some colleagues in our world who seek to reduce music to nothing more than a warm bath and background music. It can, of course, be the background to our lives, and often is, but should also be an active background, not just oral wallpaper or mood music. In my time at the BBC, I was glad when Radio 3 was referred to by contrast as a power shower. Of course, there are times when a warm bath is just what we need, but to ignore the power of music to stimulate, to energize, to console, and yes, challenge and confuse us is to deny its unique qualities. Music can do what words can't express and can make our lives immeasurably more rich. Coming together to perform and to listen is a humanitarian happening like nothing else, all done by music. And that is indeed the power of music, to make an impact as a collective experience, as well as play powerfully on our individual emotions. And I suggest there's a spiritual dimension too. As Kurt Vonnegut said, "If I should ever die, God forbid, let this be my epitaph. The only proof he needed for the existence of God was music." And Vonnegut's not alone in recognizing the importance of music in our spiritual life. This is what the Indian master Sri Chinmoy noted. Music is the inner or universal language of God. I don't know French or German, Italian, but if music is played, immediately the heart of the music enters into my heart, or my heart enters into the music. At that time, we don't need outer communication. The inner communion of the heart is enough. My heart is communing with the heart of the music, and in our communion, we become inseparably one. And in the spiritual world, next to meditation, is music, the breath of music. Meditation is silence, energizing and fulfilling, and silence is the eloquent expression of the inexpressible. As Huxley said, after silence, that which comes nearest to expressing the inexpressible is music. But what can music tell us? Well, it can show how we can live and work together better. We can, of course, for example, use the analogy of an orchestra to appreciate how we could do just that. If we really listen with active listening, we show trust and respect in those with whom we're communicating. Just hearing is not enough. That's passive listening. Active listening needs to be at the heart of our relationships, and the orchestra gives us a clue as to why this is so important. All members of the orchestra have a vital role to play. They have interdependency. Central to their work is listening, because there are times when the players have to recognize that they are not the most important part and have to let another player be allowed to be more prominent. They play a support role, and a colleague has the limelight. That will allow a complete picture to emerge and the voice leading to be clear. The listener will more easily understand the structure and emotional core of a piece of music by this foreground and background. That's what's being offered. If all 100 players play at the same dynamic, then it's as confusing and potentially as dangerous a discussion being had by all voices shouting at each other at the same time. So a truly balanced, listening and respectful orchestra is a wonderful model to show how a functioning society might best operate. In music, nothing stands still, and when it's repeated, it is different because of the passage of time. In life, however, the human being not only tends to attempt to dispose of the unpleasurable or the negative as soon as we can, but also to hold on as solidly as possible to the pleasurable or positive. Both of these desires, as has been observed, don't take into consideration the fact that human beings themselves, we are all subject to change and the speed at which it happens. And our music world is changing and changing at an alarming rate, as also our audience behaviors, and if we're not careful, our values will change as well. And this change also brings with it the questioning of matters, of organizations, of the value of things that I suspect we all hold dear. A couple of years ago, I gave the Royal Philharmonic Society lecture, suggesting that for the future health of classical music, we need all to work together, and where possible, put aside self-interest in favor of common purpose. We shouldn't try to maintain this precious art form unchanged in a changing world, or merely to preserve it for the sake of it. The blind acceptance of classical music tradition is simply laziness. Tradition and heritage do need to be examined and, where appropriate, maintained. However, they also need to be made fit for our times. T.S. Eliot said, "A tradition without intelligence is not worth having." Collins already mentioned Pierre Boulez's much lamented figure. He went further. Tradition is schlamperei, laziness or muddle-headedness. And I suggest we need to work together to sustain and build this world of classical music, if only to pass it on in such good health to the generation of listeners and performers that will follow us. At Aldeburgh Music, we're trying to lead by example. This year's Aldeburgh Festival has a Grade 1 challenge. For those of you who have not taken yet your Grade 1 piano, this is the opportunity to sign up. And how wonderful to see the ABRSM and Trinity College London working together on this particular project. We already have hundreds of people who've signed up, of all ages, I have to add, to take this particular challenge, and in doing so then earn themselves the right on the final day of the festival either to play on the wonderful Steinway on the stage of the Snape Maltings Concert Hall or on Britain's own piano at the Red House. and again, thanks to the Britain Peers Foundation, with whom we're working, to offer such a special thing to newcomers to this instrument. It's a way of thinking about how we can keep alive this sort of spirit of excitement that I hope we still all share, not least as if we come to instruments for the first time, but also if we're hearing composers' music for the first time. And perhaps particularly importantly, how do we make our day-to-day orchestral music making as exciting as those occasional orchestras who seem to play with such energy and commitment? It's really hard, I think, on orchestras that are playing day in, day out, who are often seen as just routine, when often their playing is far more than that. But you'll then hear people talking about the Lucerne Festival Orchestra, or the John Wilson Orchestra, or our fine youth orchestras, or the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, and saying, there's an energy and excitement there. How can we find a way to celebrate what goes on day in, day out? Because music making, in the end, is all about partnership. The relationship between the composer and the performer and the listener, the collective experience of the audience, and the desire for all of us who love music to share our passions. Of course, there are many positive stories to tell, but there were also sad, disturbing mutterings about the future of key organizations in our music world. And we need to ask the question, isn't it possible to share ideals and agree a set of common aims based around the sustaining of our musical world and not leap to simplistic views dominated by self-interest? Difficult situations affect us all. Similarly, success in one area of our musical world is good news for us all. But there's also the potential toxicity in bad news in our industry, which can too quickly spread as well. So back to that lazy, casual comment. Those people who will just quietly question whether the BBC should be spending £25 million on sustaining 5 orchestras. Those people who will casually say, well, of course, if only English National Opera would leave the Colosseum. And then when you ask the question, that may be a solution, where should they go? I've got no idea, comes the answer. How lazy and casual is that? And in simply posing those questions, suddenly worlds which are really important to us become undermined. The whole question of the future of the EU and our involvement in it. I don't know the full picture, but I suspect that the music students who are attending this college and other significant colleges throughout the UK will be significantly affected if we leave the EU. That funding environment will change dramatically, and we'll find that all sorts of students who enrich our lives and the connections that we will feel with Europe will be broken forever. And the London Concert Hall. How hard it is now for us to have any sort of nuanced debate publicly about any of these key issues. If you take a view and ask a question about whether we need a new concert hall in London, just simply asking the question can portray you as being anti-Simon Rattle or anti the London Symphony Orchestra or anti the Barbican. Similarly, just as if we were to say how wonderful it is, as it is, that Simon is coming back to London to run the London Symphony Orchestra, and thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a new concert hall in London, suddenly you're anti everything outside London or anti all the other orchestras. Too often, therefore, we just don't have a chance to have a genuinely public, nuanced debate. We are in the world of sound bites. We are in the world of folk who are simply too quick to leap to attack, often with rather flimsy knowledge of the facts. And probably the way to test it is by putting audiences first. Just think about the way in which we might come to a lot of these issues by just thinking, actually, do we need 2 substantial, high-quality opera companies based in London? Is there an audience to sustain it? What might it mean for us in a new concert hall in London? What might it mean for the rest of the country? And work together to have those particular conversations. And the real challenge of our time is actually reaching those audiences and attracting their attention, and then maintaining their interest. Because the competition is actually not for like-minded activity, the competition is for people's time. A recent survey in the UK reported that teenagers consume 9 hours of media every 6 hours. It's a terrifying statistic, but it's also a reminder that multitasking is simply a norm for young audiences, and we ignore this real teenage world in the explosion of mobile phone, tablet consumption at our peril. Our Friday Afternoons project at Aldeburgh Music is one, I think, good example of where live music's at the heart of a project, but actually disseminated digitally, and crucially then, with material available free at the point of use to those who want to learn to sing, to learn the new songs, new music at its heart, and to be able to engage in that particular project, and then have the fun of seeing their performances go worldwide to audiences of tens of thousands. So it's the fragmentation of the media and audiences which forces, or should force us, to restate some of the important principles by which our musical and wider cultural world should be governed. And they are, for me, the support of live performance, new work, and quality. And of course, to measure quality is hard, but we can't shy away from it. It's vital in every area of work we undertake. Those who try to see the bigger picture realize what's at stake and want to connect with audiences. And I suppose I can sum up with a few reminders of what I regard to be some necessary steps in securing a continuing, brilliant life for classical music in the UK. Understanding audiences and their behaviours, being able to take them by the hand and take them to new places, and leading them rather than following them. Artistic leadership and excellence throughout, that's what should drive our world. Never forget that live music should be at the top of our world. And that's one of the great things about new technology, that actually the primacy of live music is actually now being reinforced. Look at the way in which the Opera House or the Met is now finding its audiences, because you can just go down the road in Aldeburgh and experience live performances from the Met or from Covent Garden. And what a revolution that is, and at such an affordable price to be able to consume that live music publicly funded. And let's never lose our curiosity in music, not just the music of Parry, but also that ability to want to discover more and to explain to our audiences that there's a wonderful journey of discovery we can all go on. Let's train our audiences to listen. We talk in significant organizations like this one, in which I'm standing, of the importance of training performance. It's also really important because the majority of time we will spend probably in relation to music is as a listener. And when there's competition for time, then that's a really important thing to remember about the challenge that just simply listening and that voice leading, how to listen through, particularly a lengthy piece, is a really important quality to develop. Let's also be flexible about what we do, and with flexibility, of course, comes challenging the way we work. I think Somerset Maugham was right. I've talked about tradition being our guide and not our jailer. And let's also be present very much with confidence and be ready to reinvent to fit ourselves for ever-changing times. That's, I think, what we're doing at Aldeburgh Music, building on Britain's founding vision, not least support for and nurturing of new work, unique talent development programs, and using music to its maximum effect in the community. And as we develop our thoughts about the next 10 years of Snape Maltings, having just acquired the whole site, the next 10 years of Snape Maltings, developing it as a creative campus, I trust you'll see there an even greater flowering of the place as a unique international centre for music. It's that type of reinvention, that sense of reinvigorating original ideals and visions, which is so thrilling and now so necessary, and the need for ever more working together and to remain flexible while pursuing excellence. Here's what somebody recently said about the Snape Maltings creative campus in the world of Aldeburgh music. 5 miles outside the Suffolk seaside town of Aldeburgh, among the open fenland of East Anglia's Sunshine Coast, sits a set of imposing Victorian barley malting houses. When the malting business dried up here in the 60s, Benjamin Britten spearheaded a project to convert the largest of the disused buildings into a concert hall to house his then burgeoning annual Aldeburgh Music Festival. 50 years on, with several of the other buildings on the site now converted into studios and performance spaces, the entire Snape Maltings complex is home to Aldeburgh Music, an international creative centre for contemporary music that hosts concerts all year round and offers residencies to composers and enables them to develop new work. In the context of austerity Britain and more generally, the culture industry's financial contraction over the past 2 decades, it feels like a minor miracle that a place like Aldeburgh Music exists at all. Bucolically flanked by the River Alde to one side and rolling fields to the other, with giant sculptures by Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth dotting the grounds, the entire site is inspiringly tranquil. Curious noises emanate from the practice rooms within the complex's various buildings, rather like here, really, amplifying the stirring, otherworldly feel, and the overall effect is one of seductive disassociation. There's a sense that the creativity-sapping drudgery of real life just doesn't happen here, that this place is a greenhouse for those exotic musical plants that would struggle to survive anywhere else. I couldn't have put it better myself. We live in a fast-changing world, and music can help us understand our place in it. As Daniel Barenboim puts it wonderfully, the power of music lies in its ability to speak to all aspects of the human being, the animal, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. How often we think that personal, social, and political issues are interdependent, without influencing each other. From music, we learn that this is an objective impossibility. There simply are no independent elements. Logical thought and intuitive emotions are permanently united. Music teaches us, in short, that everything is connected. That's a powerful thought, but maybe it's simpler than that. Perhaps Nietzsche was right when he said, without music, life would be a mistake. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Roger. As usual, you've been inspiring, wise, and given me certainly a lot to think about. I'm going to take a more measured view of that overripe orchestration by Elgar of Paris, Jerusalem, which I know in the past I tried to persuade you to abandon, but without success so far. But thank you very much for this evening. Being in an institution like this does give us pause for thought. I think we have a lot in common, actually, both with you in your previous role and the current role. People are always saying to me, the college should do this, the college should do that. I mean, who are these people? We are the college. Thank you very much. You must feel the same. You must have felt the same at the BBC. You must feel the same about opera as well. But meanwhile, thank you very much for a wonderful session. And I hope everybody in the room has really got a lot out of this, and also people joining us on the live stream. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Roger. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you again.
Thanks very much.